It is my great privilege to introduce Nathan Cheng. Nathan is
Let's get started. As I said before, I'm just going to do maybe a 20-30-minute presentation on longevity industry overview. So basically for today, I just want to outline 3 key things. So the first part, I just want to talk about what's the goal of this industry, at least as I view it, and maybe we'll get some other opinions as well. But and then the second part, maybe we'll discuss where are we now. So in relation to this goal, how are we doing? And then last part, how do we get to our goal? So yeah, let's start. So the first part is what's the goal? So when people use the word longevity, it means so many different things. Some people think longevity means, eating kale and cold plunges. Other people have different ideas about what longevity actually means. And so I just want to be clear what sort of context I'm coming from. So maybe we'll get some audience interaction here. So just quickly, everybody who's watching today in the room or on Zoom, who here in the audience wants to die against their own will? Feel free to raise your hand, stand up and say, I want to die against my own will. No takers? Okay, that's what I thought. So as you can imagine, not many people want to die against their own will. No, not many people want to lose their health against their own will. So if we have this sort of moral intuition that life is good and that death is a bad thing, and as much as every year of functional healthy life is good, we should probably it makes sense for us to extend lifespan, and there's no potential end to that moral good. Every extra year is good. Then really what we're thinking here, in my view, is that's the ultimate goal for longevity should be to extend lifespan indefinitely, right? We should always be pushing the limits of people's freedom over their lives. And I think this is basically where the directional arrow of social progress is already pointing anyways. So it's just good to articulate this because there are certain moral hangups about people when we talk about extending lifespan. But I think if we really think about our moral intuition, life is good and we should extend it, and life extension should be a good thing. So yeah, I think the ultimate goal should be to extend lifespan indefinitely. But in our current situation, there are many things that kill people and cut short our lifespans. So just a quick question from the audience. What are the top causes of death? So I put in the United States here, but it's pretty common, similar across all, let's say, wealthy nations. So what do you think are the top causes of death?
Heart disease?
Cardiovascular.
Yeah, heart disease. Yeah, cardiovascular. Yeah, definitely. That's number one. Anybody else? Any other causes of death?
Dementia, perhaps?
Cancer?
Yeah, dementia, cancer. Yeah, exactly. So as you can tell, okay, someone jumped the gun.
Where's he going with this?
So if you look at the top 10 causes of death in the United States, heart disease obviously ranks very highly. Cancer, COVID-19, in the past couple of years, obviously another big cause of death. Stroke, we have Alzheimer's disease, and so forth and so forth. And the interesting thing is about most of these top 10 causes of death actually have a very strong age-related component to them. So if we look underneath the hood at some of these chronic diseases that kill a lot of people, the majority of people, such as cardiovascular disease or dementia, cancer, if you look at the risk or the incidence or prevalence of actually getting these diseases as you get older, it actually goes up exponentially, right? And so there's something universal going on here that's fundamentally tying these different sort of diseases together. And we know that basically this is aging, right? There's something going on at the cellular, tissue, molecular level that is causing us to be more susceptible to getting these diseases that kill most people. So yeah, so aging really is this root cause of all these age-related diseases. it's a costly phenomena, right? So not only does it kill a lot of people, it causes a lot of suffering, and it's something that costs governments and people a lot of money. So this is an example in the United States, but the total Medicare and Medicaid, so the government spending to treat or manage Alzheimer's disease in the United States is projected to reach over $1 trillion by 2050. So this is like a big problem as populations age. So yeah, when we're thinking about doing the most good from a moral perspective, extending lifespan indefinitely, that's great. For the people who are soulless capitalists who don't care about saving lives or reducing suffering, longevity can also be for you because, as we said before, aging is very costly. So there's like let's say a commercial aspect to solving this problem. And an economist at London Business School, along with David Sinclair, authored this paper a couple of years back, basically trying to estimate the economic value of extending healthy lifespan by just 1 year, like globally. And they calculated that this was roughly $38 trillion of economic value. So there's definitely a business incentive as well to do something about aging. So I think I clearly laid out from like the moral perspective, but also if you're interested in industry and commercialization and business and so forth, there's a strong need and an incentive to do something about aging. This is like sort of like a moral imperative. And the thing is, like the other thing that I really want to stress to the audience today is it's not just like a nice thing to have, right? To not die of like these horrible diseases. This is really an emergency. This is not a theoretical abstract concept, aging, right? This is something that's happening right now to your loved ones, your parents. It's happening to your friends. It's happening to you. It's happening even to your children. So yeah, all these processes are happening from the very beginning. So hopefully I've laid out the goal for the talk, and you're convinced that we should do something about aging, and there should not be some limit to the point at which we just give up extending lifespans. We should continually extend lifespan indefinitely. But so the question is, how is humanity doing if this is the goal, right? And unfortunately, when it comes to interventions which are approved by some regulatory body, that demonstrates, efficacy, there really aren't any interventions approved for aging or longevity or lifespan as of 2024. So we're really in the sort of like 0 to 1 phase of this industry of trying to do something about aging biomedically with technology. But that's not to say that there hasn't been any progress. There's been a lot of different developments, both on like basic science, but also in the industry over the past, let's say, 3 or so decades. So really, the beginnings of longevity biotech stretch all the way back to the 1980s and the 1990s, with the first discovery of let's say the first longevity genes, the study of like molecular biology of aging, mostly in like in vitro or in model organisms. Yeah, but then in the 2000s, based on some of these discoveries, there was like a first wave of longevity startups, including companies like Geron, Elixir, and a more controversial, a company called Certris Pharmaceuticals. And unfortunately, that first wave of companies didn't really produce much. They kind of fizzled out. Most of those companies were eventually shut down, or they pivoted away from aging. But then there was this sort of like inflection point in 2013 where some bigger names in biotech came into the aging space, giving it more legitimacy and injecting large amounts of capital into the space, which made it easier and more, I guess, kosher for this industry, like this longevity industry, for people to actually try to develop medicines for aging. So, the two companies were Calico, started in 2013, a subsidiary of Google, and this was a multi-billion-dollar sort of like venture, and then that was headed by Art Levinson, who used to be a CEO of Genentech, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And then the other person who came into the field around 2013 was Craig Venter, obviously really well known from the Human Genome Project. And yeah, he started a company called Human Longevity Inc., mostly a diagnostics company. But yeah, so mostly, that was just like a major inflection point in terms of like normalizing this industry and making it acceptable to work on, essentially. And then in 2016, between like 2013 to like the present 2024, there was a sort of an explosion of different approaches to tackling aging, outside of these like typical longevity genes, the canonical ones, but yeah, including things like senolytics, like removing senescent cells, partial reprogramming, which eventually led to some really crazy big companies, which we'll talk about later. And then yeah, and a bunch of other different targets and so forth. But yeah, fast forward today, there's definitely a lot of interest in the space. We have big funders. There's even clinical trials being conducted of drugs that have been developed in the context of aging. And yeah, so there's definitely things happening, even though there hasn't been like, let's say, a successful approval. Now, yeah, this is also just a slide talking about maybe not just the industry, but also the, the basic science of aging. This is kind of like the kind of a summary of some of the things that people think, let's say, are associated with aging or potential mechanisms of aging. And yeah, so in 2013, there's this famous paper called the Hallmarks of Aging. Yeah, and just recently last year, they updated the paper, including a couple more hallmarks of aging. So people are studying things and categorizing them. We're understanding more, let's say, but we're definitely not anywhere close to like a comprehensive understanding of aging. There's a lot of like fundamental stuff there that is not fully understood. So yeah, to summarize really about what's this current state of longevity right now. One, there's definitely been like an explosion of interest in funding in longevity biotech. There's always these like big, headlines that I'll talk about in a second. But taken in context, longevity biotech is still a really, really, really tiny industry, especially when you consider, the fact that aging is the primary cause of most of the diseases that kill us, and we devote so few resources to this industry, and it's just like it just doesn't make sense actually. So this is like a really like a call to action for people in this audience to really go out there and build this industry. We need more people, more resources to tackle this problem of aging. So yeah, just a little sampling of these big headlines that have come out in the past couple of years. Altos Labs was probably the biggest one. A startup, let's say, a company and research organization, I guess, launched with $3 billion, backed by Yuri Milner allegedly and Jeff Bezos allegedly. And yeah, going after partial reprogramming mostly. Sam Altman, also of OpenAI, invested $180 million into a company called Retro Biosciences. Brian Armstrong from Coinbase also invested $105 million of his own money to co-found a company called New Limit. Saudi Arabia announced in 2022 a Evolution Foundation, which has earmarked about $1 billion per year to fund basic aging research, but also fund some startups as well. And this is really, really an impressive amount of money considering the Saudi GDP. So $1 billion a year is roughly like 1/8% of their GDP. So this is getting up to almost like Apollo level, on a proportional basis, kind of like funding. And then just recently, this year, X Prize, Healthspan X Prize, the largest X Prize in history. It's basically a competition to award $101 million to someone who can demonstrate about like 10 or 20 years of rejuvenation with some sort of intervention. So yeah, stuff is happening, and there's a lot of big numbers, but longevity is still small. And how small? Well, there's only about like 180 or so longevity biotech startups. There's across that number of companies, it's roughly $13 billion in funding. There are a number of longevity-focused VCs, like maybe 20 or so, but by and large, this is actually like a really small industry. So to give you more context, if we take the total valuation of all the publicly traded pharma and biotech companies, only the publicly traded ones, that's about like $5 trillion. If we take the longevity biotech companies, public and private, there's actually not that many public companies. You can estimate it's less than 50 billion. So there's like this huge disparity between the sizes of these industries. And yet again, like to emphasize, most of the diseases that kill us are caused by aging, but we spend disproportionately small amounts of resources on trying to do something about that. And the same goes with startup funding. So if we look at venture capital in biotech between 2017 to 2021, longevity biotech only made up about 2 to 3% of that total funding. So yeah, very small. And the same goes for basic research. So if we look at the NIH budget in the US, only about 0.5% of the NIH budget is allocated to understanding fundamental aging biology. So, and again, I feel like I'm, repeating myself too much. And this is despite the fact that aging is the root cause of the diseases that kill most of us, right? Yeah, but things are looking optimistic maybe in terms of funding, in terms of like trends, let's say. So over the past 7 years, the amount of funding coming into the space has roughly increased 7x over 7 years. Yeah, but unfortunately, like a lot of this is kind of like not consistent. It's dominated by a lot of these larger companies like Altos and Calico. And then, yeah, last year was kind of a rough year for a lot of startups, let's say, not just biotech startups, just like startups in general, unless you are in the generative AI space. So, obviously, with interest rates rising, increases the cost of capital. So last year, there was a large drawdown in biotech funding and also longevity biotech funding as a result, maybe more than like 70% drawdown. But, things are starting to look a little bit more optimistic this year. We've seen some larger funding rounds, like BioAge just recently announced a $170 million Series D financing. So yeah, I think the markets are starting to recover, at least from my early vantage point. Yeah, and this is just another slide from Bruce Booth from LifeSci VC, just showing the sort of the carnage that happened last year in the biotech venture capital. So yeah, a trend that was not exclusively limited to longevity, but it was just like a general phenomenon. Okay, so let's talk about the investor ecosystem. So yeah, the first longevity venture fund was started in 2011 by Laura Deming, a Thiel fellow at the age of 17, very small fund. Fast forward to 2016, Apollo Health Venture gets into the game, and now they've raised a second fund and have about $200 million of assets under management. They're the largest longevity venture fund right now operating. And yeah, and it's not just venture funds which are getting into this game. There's obviously sovereigns like Evolution, which I mentioned before, with Saudi Arabia putting $1 billion per year into the space. There's also new forms of funding from like the Web3, let's say crypto, decentralized space, with DAOs like VitaDAO, AthenaDAO, and now CryoDAO. So yeah, there's an interesting diversity of people tackling this problem with different funding mechanisms. So yeah, here's just a landscape of different longevity VCs. We have the exclusively or mostly exclusively focused on longevity venture capital firms, including Healthspan Capital. But then, yeah, but then there's also distributed companies, large portfolio style companies, let's say, that hold subsidiaries. Most famous, I think, is probably like Cambrian Biopharma. Some of the more blue chip VCs like Khosla Ventures and A16 have also invested in longevity companies, especially Khosla, let's say. And then there's also the DAOs, which I mentioned before. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting space for funding. For clinical trials, there's about maybe 40 or so, depending on how you count it, aging clinical trials, which are kind of in development, let's say. There still hasn't been an approval yet from zero, for the first longevity intervention. We're still waiting for that first one, but there has been like successes in earlier phases, like maybe not like for a phase 3 trial, but there have been some like early successes in phase 1, let's say in phase 2. So just a couple examples. BioAge last year announced that they had positive phase 1b data from their muscle aging drug. And Unity Biotechnology also reported some positive phase 2 trial data last year for their senolytic drug, to treat diabetic macular edema. So yeah, there's some early successes in the clinic, but still we still have to wait and see in terms of what's going to happen for the first approvals and phase 3 trials. Okay, so hopefully
Nathan, just a quick question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Could you expand on the, or could you talk a bit about the expanded label approach that these companies that you just mentioned are taking?
Yes, I will. I have a slide here, maybe. Oh, okay. Maybe I'll skip this one. Okay, so okay, I do have a slide. Maybe I'll answer that in like 3 slides, if that's okay. Like 3 slides from now.
Go for it.
Okay. So yeah, I'll just briefly talk about.
If you go back 1 slide, I think you had the term there. If you want to use that one.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, actually, I'll fast forward to here. Okay. So when people are talking about longevity startups and actually like developing a drug or an intervention, you have to demonstrate that it works somehow, right? And there's different playbooks for doing this. And the predominant sort of paradigm for doing this is called label expansion. So most of the companies right now in the longevity space, they develop a drug for a single indication, so some sort of disease, which is not aging per se, but it could be something that's related to the mechanism of aging that they're targeting. So maybe if you think mitochondrial dysfunction is like a major cause of aging and you're trying to target that, you could go after like a rare mitochondrial disease and try and do that as your first indication, or you could go after something like, I don't know, Parkinson's, like a age-related disease. And so the idea is to get like an approval for that specific disease first, and then you can label expand to other age-related diseases. So you can start a clinical trial for like, I don't know, like cancer or Alzheimer's disease or some other disease of aging. And if your drug works to either prevent or treat multiple age-related diseases, maybe this is a good proxy to say that this is like an anti-aging drug and that it could maybe extend lifespan. Now, the issue here is like we're always working with proxies, right? So we won't fully know whether it extends, maximum lifespan until maybe it shows up in the demographic data, or if you do like a lifespan trial, which would take a long time. But yeah, that's kind of like the predominant playbook right now. Now, there's other ways to do it. Maybe you could just develop a biomarker, right, of aging, something that stands in for aging. So you could just measure it as like a surrogate endpoint, much in the way that drugs that are developed to treat like cardiovascular disease or atherosclerosis only have to show like a decrease in LDL cholesterol as like a surrogate endpoint. Or you could do something like the X Prize, where you have some different measures of different systems, and you can rejuvenate them in some sort of way. So people are working on this, but it's still not clear what is sufficient or an appropriate biomarker of aging would be, especially in the clinical context. But then the other approach that could be tried, but has not been attempted by any company so far, is a geroprotection trial. So what you could do is test in a clinical trial, test your drug in older adults and see if it's able to delay the latency between diagnoses of multiple comorbidities of aging. So you would, measure the time between, like, if you got diagnosed with cancer, but then 2 or 3 years later, or whatever X number of years later, you are diagnosed with another age-related disease, like, I don't know, Alzheimer's disease. And if you can show that the time between those diagnoses are extended or delayed or whatever, for people who are treated with your anti-aging drug, then maybe this is a good proxy for a longevity drug. And then I should also mention that there are companies working to develop drugs for pets to extend lifespan in pets. And in this situation, actually, it's practical to actually demonstrate actual lifespan extension because certain breeds of dogs only live maybe 10 15 years, and in that time you could demonstrate that your drug or whatever intervention can extend their lifespan. So that's another model. Yeah, do I want to talk about this? Okay, I should mention just very briefly like the different frameworks that people are using to come up with like ways to target aging. So I had mentioned earlier the 9 hallmarks of aging. This is a famous paper. It's just laying out different potential mechanisms of aging that people have collated over the years, including things like telomere attrition, cellular senescence, and so forth. But then there's also these 7 SENS categories. So looking at different types of damage that accumulate in our cells as we age and also outside of our cells. And this sort of SENS category was popularized by Aubrey de Grey in 2002. And yeah, then there's other ways of like replacement, regenerative medicine, like replacing cells, tissues, or organs. And then there's things like hypothesis-free, let's say, where you don't really know what the target is. You do some sort of high throughput screen, or you do some sort of discovery approach based on large data sets to try and find new targets or new mechanisms of aging, let's say. So those are a bunch of different things. So I know we're quickly running out of time, and I want to leave some time for Q&A, but I'll just maybe just give you a very, very brief overview of some of the different subsectors in longevity biotech, different ways people are trying to target aging and develop companies into different technologies. So roughly speaking, there's kind of like 2 categories that you can kind of subdivide it into. There's sort of more traditional aging pharma, which includes a lot of like the first generation of aging therapeutics, like a lot of the small molecule drug approaches that are going on right now. And then there's number 2, if we have time, some frontier paradigms, so more radical strategies that are trying to get like a large effect size in delaying or extending lifespan that very few people are talking about and very few people even know about. So hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to discuss that. If not, you'll have to wait for, I guess, Mark's talk on the LBF roadmap maybe in the future. But yeah, just a couple of the sort of longevity subsectors in the traditional aging pharma. A lot of this is based on like different mechanisms of aging that people have collated in, let's say, like the SENS categorization framework or the hallmarks of aging. Or it could be more like, hypothesis-free, like using AI machine learning or regenerative medicine, or it can be like application-based, like pet longevity, reproductive aging as well is another interesting application sort of way to categorize companies. Yeah, and in terms of like startup funding by these different subcategories or subsectors, by and large, most of the funding is going to partial reprogramming. And that's obviously because of these like large mega startup companies like Altos Labs and Retro Biosciences, and even Calico to some degree. But if you look on like the right, there's all this opportunity of like, subsectors they're extremely underfunded, like, companies trying to look at extracellular matrix or DNA repair. Okay, so maybe I'll just briefly talk about partial reprogramming because it is kind of like the giant in the room, let's say. So yeah, in 2006, Shinya Yamanaka was able to demonstrate this induced pluripotent stem cell technology or discovery. So he, by expressing these 4 transcription factors, OSKM, in old cells, he demonstrated that you could actually reset the state of an old cell, like an old adult cell, back to an embryonic sort of like blank slate youthful state. And fast forward to, and he later received the Nobel Prize for that work. But in 2016, researchers at the Salk Institute, Alejandro Campo and Belmonte, took this this technique a little bit further, and they did sort of like a transient expression of these transcription factors. So not turning them all the way on and going all the way back to a blank slate sort of state, but instead they just sort of pulsed it on and off, and they were able to show that this could potentially rejuvenate like cells, and they were able to do this in in vivo, so in a live mouse, in an accelerated aging mouse model, they were able to demonstrate that it could extend median lifespan by about 30%. And so this sparked a lot of interest in a bunch of different companies trying to go after rejuvenation, basically finding different genes that could rejuvenate essentially the epigenetic state, the gene expression state of cells without resetting let's say the cell identity, so not changing the cell type. So yeah, obviously companies like Altos Labs, New Limit, Rector Biosciences, they're all in this sort of like space race to find novel reprogramming factors that could be safe, but also rejuvenate cells. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. There's a lot of interest in pet longevity recently because of an announcement by one of the leading companies in the space, Loyal. They were able to get FDA, sort of like a accelerated FDA approval for a drug that is trying to extend lifespan and health span in dogs. So they have about 5 years to run this study in the meantime. And yeah, this could be the first, let's say, a drug approved for lifespan extension. Of course, only in dogs, but it's a start, and it could spur more investment in the space potentially, let's say. So yeah, so that's a major development. And then I'll just briefly touch on another subsector. So there's a number of companies developing drugs to target senescent cells. So senescent cells are a type of cell that accumulates with age, and basically they're cells that enter this cycle of permanent cell cycle arrest. So basically, and this is bad because these cells actually emit this kind of these pro-fibrotic and pro-inflammatory factors, which are implicated in some diseases of aging. So a number of companies are developing different therapies to try and remove these cells, to kill these cells. And they're trying all different ways, including small molecules, gene therapies, and everything in between. Okay, I'm just going to quickly go through these. I'm not going to go in any depth because we don't have much time. But I just want to give you like a flavor of the diversity of different companies. So obviously there's some companies targeting mitochondrial dysfunction and doing that in different ways. There's also companies leveraging different factors that appear in young blood versus old blood, and maybe there's something going on there that could be used for rejuvenation. This is called heterochronic pyrebiosis. A lot of the factors are being studied from that, and there's a number of companies developing therapies in that sort of paradigm. Of course, AI and machine learning is obviously very very hyped these days, and there's a number of companies trying different ways, all the way from like generative chemistry to more just like leveraging large data sets and AI machine learning algorithms to find new targets and so forth. And then there's also companies targeting autophagy. So this is the cell's natural process of recycling proteins and organelles in different parts inside a cell. There's regenerative medicine, so you can replace or regenerate cells, tissues, and organs. And there's a number of companies working on that. There's also reproductive aging. So there's a link between early menopause and poor health outcomes with aging in females. And yeah, so this could be like a kind of like a interesting system of accelerated aging to target different drugs. And maybe that could have like positive health outcomes for aging. And then obviously there's different aggregates, both intracellular and extracellular. So intracellular, I think lipofuscin is maybe one of the more interesting ones that people are trying to target. Extracellular, obviously things like beta amyloid and so forth, also like oxidized cholesterol in the context of cardiovascular disease. So there's, yeah, a number of companies working on that. Frontier paradigms, we won't get in much time to discuss this, but I just want to let you guys know that there's all these different really cutting edge sort of technologies and approaches to try to solve aging or have a really large effect size on the aging problem. And Mark will probably talk about this in his talk later. Yeah, at LBF, we've created this roadmap to elucidate and articulate some of these different novel strategies that will actually get us to solving aging, not just like a stepping stone in between. And yeah, so we're really interested in this because it's great that companies are developing sort of like the first initial drugs to target aging, and that could definitely get more interest and talent into the space and funding, of course, into the space of longevity. But at the same time, I think most people have recognized that none of those first generation drugs or whatever for aging are going to be the ultimate solution to aging itself. We're still going to need something that solves this problem in a comprehensive way. And we need people to be working on those now as well, not just waiting for the future where more funding has come into the space, and then that funding will go to actually developing these technologies. So we won't talk about these in any depth, but we've sort of identified 3 sort of interesting strategies, including whole body replacement and progressive brain replacement, biostasis. So this includes cryopreservation as kind of like a stopgap solution. It's actually not a solution for aging, but is an interesting solution for some people, let's say. And so that, yeah, biostasis includes, cryopreservation, chemical fixation, let's say, as well, and maybe some interesting hybridation techniques, let's say. And then there's advanced bioengineering. So developing some sort of model or understanding of aging, like a very detailed understanding of human biology, and then having the tools to manipulate our cells and all the structures outside the cell, let's say, at scale. And so that kind of falls under the category of advanced bioengineering. Okay, cool. So I'm going to wrap up now. So in summary, aging is an urgent problem, right? We've discussed how it's a primary cause of death and suffering. It's costly, and we need to do something about it today, right? Not just something that we think abstractly in the future. And despite the fact that it's an urgent problem, we don't have anything that works yet. There's a number of drugs and interventions in clinical trials today, so we might be able to get the first win, let's say, in the near-term future, but we're not sure, right? Like these could all fail as well, and there have been failures in the past in clinical trials for aging drugs. There's definitely growing interest, but it's still a small field. And there's many different pathways and different strategies to try and target aging, but again, it's still a small field. There's very few resources compared to the scale of the problem and the importance of the problem. It's just completely disproportionate and actually completely crazy. And we need more talent and we need more funding to build a future where people don't have to age unless they want to, and nobody has to die against their own will. I think this is something that we can all get on board for. So the epilogue, I'm just going to make a shameless plug for what I'm trying to do to solve this problem. So right now we have a small industry, it's growing, but we don't have anything that works. The goal is to extend lifespan indefinitely. But how do we get there? I think, I don't know for sure what will work, but I know at the end of the day, the things that do work will be built by people, right? So people who are mission aligned on this ultimate goal, who are very, driven and willing to take big risks and have an indomitable will and let's say compassion and for this problem of aging, right? So so if that describes you, if you want to take part in this most daring and most nearly insurmountable challenge, and possibly the most significant thing that humanity will ever do, if you're interested in this, then definitely get involved. Like I said before, it's a small field. We need more people to be working on this problem. And at Longevity Biotech Fellowship, we're trying to basically get the world's top talent, whether you're a software engineer or a machine learning scientist, AI researcher, or a biologist, biotechnologist, an entrepreneur, or an investor. We're trying to get the world's top talent to come together in our community and tackle this problem of aging to actually solve it. So yeah, we run these intensive workshop retreats every year. We're doing 4 a year basically, yeah, these workshop retreats basically bring people together who are extremely mission aligned, very talented, and we give them the community and context basically to find ways for them to have the highest impact on this problem, the problem of aging. So, our next retreat is going to be in Spain, May 15th to 19th. So if you know anybody who might be interested, definitely send them our way. Yeah, and love to see some of you guys there. And then the other thing that I'm working on, which Linus alluded to, is vitalism. So not everybody maybe has the time or the background or whatever to make an impact, to like directly work on the technology for aging. But that doesn't mean you can't do anything. Actually, people are really important in the political sense, because there's very little political demand, let's say, for allocating the required amount of resources to actually tackle this problem, the problem that is killing most people. So, if you ask yourself, what would it look like if, humanity, like society as a whole, actually cared about doing something about aging? They would make an all-out effort to fight it, right? And, humanity can fight hard, societies can fight really, really hard and allocate enormous amounts of resources to certain problems if they want to. And that's where the political demand comes in. And, for instance, the US Apollo program, employed about 400,000 people on this problem of going to the moon, let's say, and it consumed about 2.5% of GDP over 10 years. And roughly, in today's dollars, it'd be like, maybe $250 billion, all to, focused on this one, scientific technological problem, which, was based on like an ideology, right? Like that's, it's kind of like, capitalism and freedom versus communism. And because this was something that people held dear as like a fundamental moral principle and ideology, they were willing to fight hard for it. And this is what we're trying to do at Vitalism, trying to fund these massive amounts of resource allocation, sort of like moonshots for aging. And so if you're interested in taking action in a community to make things happen for aging, longevity, and basically make fighting aging and death humanity's #1 priority, then definitely check us out at vitalism.io as well. And yeah, I think that's it. And happy to take questions.
Oh, that's awesome, Nathan. Great. Thank you so much. Wow, that's so insanely great. I could talk about this a long time, but I will not. I will open up the floor for questions.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Hi, Nathan. Thank you so much for this insightful presentation. Really appreciate it. So I have a question regarding using terminology. So when I speak about longevity in Sweden, at least, people are kind of just like, oh, this is radical life extension. This is just for the billionaires. And when I phrase it preventative health or something like that, they might resonate with more. I was wondering if you have any advice or like how to phrase this in ways where more people would be open to it.
Yeah, it's a good question, and something that we struggle with as well within our communities, our respective communities. So for me, yeah, so longevity itself means different things to different people. So if you ask Peter Attia, I think, yeah, a lot of people in the audience probably know him. He's a physician who specializes in longevity medicine, let's say, and wrote like a very popular book, Outlive. His definition of longevity is like, oh, it's about, managing the last, couple decades of your life, managing the decline, basically. And then other people, like, maybe more ambitious people will say, it's about, extending lifespan indefinitely and so forth, or a long time, or giving people unlimited lifespan. But for me, I never shy away from what the ultimate goal is. I think you can tailor your message to depending on what audience you're speaking to. I think that's actually really important too. So, so in terms of like what words I like to use, I still like to use the word longevity, even though it doesn't really mean anything, because it has so many different interpretations. But at least you're kind of like in the neighborhood of what people kind of like associate with like aging and doing something about aging. There's no other really good word to use, because it's, it's the difference between legibility, but versus, just like people knowing what this word is, right? So I think longevity is fine, and then you can use that word, but then you can try and address what are the issues, right? Like what are the people's objections, right? So maybe you can ask them why they think this is only for rich people or so forth. And I think those are like longevity myths, let's say, and you have to try and nip them in the bud as quickly as possible, I think. And there's different ways to discuss that. And then the other word is like health span, right? So probably a lot of people have heard this, and this is like kind of a way to soften this issue that you probably mentioned, where people think longevity means only lifespan, and it means extending lifespan but not caring about health. So some people say health span. And I think health span is not my favorite word to use in the space, because it kind of it doesn't really recognize and acknowledge that every additional year of life is important. It's not just about squaring the mortality curve, having people healthy and then just die right away. And even if that even makes sense, right? Like if you're so healthy in your 80s and 90s, like why would you just die all of a sudden, right? The whole idea is that we should do something about aging and extend lifespan in good health, obviously. But any other questions? Sorry, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, anybody else here?
I have a question, not related to what you're talking about, but we hear a lot about longevity clinics. So what are they, and are there sort of different types of longevity clinics? Because I get that question often when I talk about longevity. Oh, I hear there's this new place in Spain I can go. So what are they, and what types of clinics are they?
Yeah, this is a good question, right? Because if I mentioned that there's nothing approved for longevity or extending lifespan, how can there be a longevity clinic? What are they doing at these clinics, right? So by and large, these clinics are just trying to optimize health, right? As best as they can within with what tools they have, right? And I think you can still have better outcomes compared to people who do nothing, right? So obviously exercising, eating, healthily and stuff like that has benefits, but they can only take you so far, right? A lot of the biohacking stuff is, kind of marginal, right? I think for the most part, if you exercise and you sleep well and you don't have a ridiculously bad diet, then you've got most of the gains that you can possibly get, unless you go, full Brian Johnson, let's say, and try and do all the different types of interventions. But that's also a risk, right? When you're trying to chase this alpha, let's say, and try and gain an edge by doing all these different interventions and combining them, there can be downsides as well, right? So I think for a lot of the times these longevity clinics, they do diagnostics, like they measure your VO2 max and maybe your body composition, and they try and keep you as healthy as you can within the context of what's available. But they don't have any secret sauce, I don't think.
Good, thanks. Thank you.
Very good. Does anybody online have a question? Please feel free to jump in.
If not, I have a question regarding your thoughts on clocks. Like at RDD this summer, there's a lot of different clocks. So, they were all showing different ages, and where are we right now? Is there one that's more reliable, or are we all just grasping?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? Because in the context of developing a surrogate biomarker for aging, like clocks, and especially the ones that are really popular right now, like DNA methylation clocks. Also, there's some work in proteomic clocks from Tony Whiskeray's lab at Stanford. So I think people are still trying to figure this out. I'm not sure what the roadmap is. There's definitely nothing close to being a universally accepted, single measure of aging. We haven't gotten there yet. Certain clocks are reasonably good at predicting mortality, let's say. So things like GrimAge and other clocks like that. But yeah, I think people are still coming together to figure out what the consensus is. So there was a biomarkers of aging symposium at the Buck Institute just this past December, where people came together and tried to discuss what the path forward is. And now there's a paper that everybody should check out. It's called just released, I think, last week, validation of biomarkers of aging, I think, Madi Mokri, and basically, yeah, summarizing what they think is kind of like the path forward. But I think we still need, there's still going to be some time in terms of developing what these biomarkers, probably plural, are going to be for aging, and how, you know, regulators might accept them as surrogate endpoints. Yeah, so still work in progress, but I'm not an expert on this.
Someone who is an expert is the Associate Professor Sara Hägg at Karolinska Institute, who will be speaking on this speaker series eventually. So anybody who's interested, keep an eye out for this. Yeah. Do we have anybody online who want to ask a question? I don't know if you can control your mics, but feel free to unmute and ask anything. If you can't, write to me in the chat and I'll try to
raise your hands.
Oh yeah, you can raise your hands as well.
Fist bump for your camera.
All right.
I have a question about perceptions in the science community, because we want like radical life extension. I'm thinking about what are like established, this is impossible, like we cannot go down this route, like the perception of impossible, that in our minds can still be viable, if that's understandable.
Yeah, I'll just answer quickly because I do unfortunately have to jump off to host my own speaker session as well. I'll be active in like a couple of minutes, which hopefully I'll see you there, Thomas. But yeah, yeah, I think there are some people within the scientific community, obviously, who will believe that, you know, this technology, like the actually reversing aging or, you know, solving aging, is impossible. But I think that's just like such a lofty claim, and we've seen time and time again, like, you know, experts within their respective fields say that something is impossible. Like Lord Kelvin, the preeminent physicist of his day, said that heavier than air flight was impossible, and then literally like either 10 or 20 years later, like the Wright brothers were able to, you know, take flight for the first time, and then like 60 years later, humans were on the moon. So it's just like it's a very tall claim to say that something's impossible, and I think we have enough evidence that in principle it should be possible to reverse aging. There's no law of physics, let's say, that prevents it, unless you're talking about like really, really large time scale, like heat death of the universe kind of time scales. then there's a compensation there. But for like, you know, the time scales that we're talking about, yeah, I don't see any reason why that would be impossible. Okay, I really need to jump. I'm so sorry, everyone. It was a pleasure chatting with you all, and yeah, hopefully see you guys again. All right,
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Goodbye.
All right, this concludes our call today. To all of you listening in, thank you so much for joining us. Our next talk will be on March 5th, where we have Aubrey de Grey, the legendary, you know, basically the father of the field.